The Rogue stands out as one of the most solid classes across so many diverse builds from melee to traps and also range play. In this video today, I'm going to go over my very enjoyable penetrating shot build for Rogue that I've been using throughout leveling and the mid game. Now, I've not pressed into the true end game with this build as just a bit of transparency up front, but I can say that it stands to be my personal favorite Rogue build as of right now. We'll go through my skill setup, talk about the skill rotation and how to play, discuss gear affixes and aspects, talk about the Paragon board, then close the video out with my thoughts about the class and build, especially coming into the first season. If this is your first time on my channel, the way I like to do things here is by upfronting the knowledge within my videos so you can decide if it's the right one for you. So with that being said, you can find the entire build, affixes, aspects, and Paragon board linked in the description on D4 builds. If you're at work or just simply want to look over that, then you can go ahead and use that link. If that's all you wanted to know though, please feel free to shut the video down. Go and play the hell out of your Rogue. Now, if you are heading out, please don't forget to like, comment, and or subscribe. Each one of those things does help me out in a very, very huge way. Also have a massive playlist filled with all my guides and how-tos for Diablo IV linked in the description, as well as at the end of the video if you need help with other subjects. But you can quickly navigate to any part of this video that interests you the most using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. Lastly, please don't forget to follow me on Twitch, where I'll be streaming Diablo IV. But let's get started here on my best pen shot Rogue build in Diablo IV. Loading into the game, let's take a look at some of the skills. The Rogue looks really weird when you use this, actually. So we're going to go ahead and do this and go to skill tree and talk about some stuff. Now I'm going to start at the top and go to the bottom here. So our big focus is going to be on forceful arrow and on penetrating shot. Those are our two kind of bread and butters of this build. Forceful arrow here is going to be doing actually a pretty decent amount of damage for a basic, but every third cast is going to make the enemy vulnerable, and we're going to take primary forceful arrow, which pierces through vulnerable enemies. It's just kind of a nice little ditty there in addition, but every third cast of forceful arrow additionally has a 15% increased crit strike chance. Jumping into penetrating shot, again, this is going to be our bread and butter. It's the name of the build. It's the biggest thing we're going to do because we're also taking the combat point specialization. With the combat points, this is going to enable us to get a lot of lucky hits off and a lot of crit damage off. So taking a look at penetrating shot, fire an arrow that pierces through all enemies in a line, dealing 119% damage. I have this thing buffed through the gills because of some items, which is super nice. But you can see that it has a base lucky hit chance of 50%. And when I've buffed this thing with 3 combo points, it does an additional 30% chance to lucky hit. So my lucky hit is at 80% chance at penetrating shot without any other modifiers. That's kind of a big key thing here. Also, we do 226% weapon damage with penetrating shot with those combo points. So basically the kind of bread and butter of the build, I can't say that fucking phrase enough, I guess, is forceful arrow, 1, 2, 3 combos, and then right click penetrating shot with an imbuement of your choice, which we'll go over in a little bit. But we then go enhance penetrating shot, so it increases damage per enemy hit or pierced, and then advanced penetrating shot. When cast with full energy, penetrating shot will slow all enemies it hits by 50%. The enemies will also be knocked down. It's a really nice way to kind of give you a little bit of crowd control utility with penetrating shots just base ability, which is really cool. Moving into the next tree, we're gonna get some passives here. So rugged, so gain 5% DR against damage over time effects, but mainly we want reactive defense. So gain 18% damage reduction while inflicted with control impairing effects. This is going to couple really nicely with all the topazes you put in your armor, which innately is going to give you a massive amount of DR when you're under a control impairing effect. It's basically like having extra slots. It's like having almost 2 extra full slots of topazes passively in your build. It's quite nice. Also weapon mastery, because we're going to be using bows and crossbows. Bows are going to get 12% increased vulnerable damage, and crossbows get 15% increased crit strike damage. We're going to favor crossbows because their implicit increases vuln damage by like 40%. It's pretty massive. And then we also get concussive. So after knocking back or knocking down an enemy, you gain 12% increased crit strike chance against them for 3 seconds. It's quite nice. So I want to kind of keep this section right here up to talk about agility and subterfuge. I have in the build right now concealment. You don't need to use concealment. You can use caltrops into disciplined caltrops, so you have 5% increased crit strike chance, and you double this amount against vulnerable enemies. You have tons of way to dish out vuln, so you get to choose. If you want to use caltrops, you definitely can. The reason I've gone with concealment here is that I find as I've crested into tier 4, into torment with this build, I didn't have a way to break out of any kind of CC, and concealment gives me unstoppable, grants me 30% movement speed, and I can move freely through enemies. I find it to be a really nice way to just kind of break out of stuff. It's basically like having the the Ghost Walker aspect constantly turned on by simply using a button, which is nice. Also, it gains energy whenever you pop into it, and the skill that breaks concealment will always be a guaranteed crit strike. So what I've really done with this is you get 3 combo points. You either use this offensively, or you realize, hey, I'm in a bind. Let me pop into concealment. I'm now stealthed, and I can use a 3 combo point penetrating shot to massive effect. And the things that will actually break your concealment or your stealth are only attacks. So you can use an imbuement while you are concealed. So this is how I've kind of visualized this, because I've then coupled that with, and we'll talk about this more in the actual aspect section, Infiltrator's aspect, which Poison Trap no longer breaks stealth and triggers no cooldown or arm time while you're in stealth. So basically, I use concealment, I run around and place a bunch of traps, pop out of stealth with my penetrating shot, blow up all the traps, and get a bunch of return on my investment. like I'm working on crypto. What the hell's wrong with me? We also have Dark Shroud, just 1 point into it, with enhanced down into Subverting Dark Shroud. So each shadow increases our movement speed. We will not have this on our bar. We will not be casting this. We'll be using the Umbrous aspect, which at max has a 60% chance to create a Dark Shroud when you crit strike, when you crit strike. So it's a very nice chance to get this thing off quite a bit, and you just passively have tons of Dark Shrouds generating. We then use Poison Trap here, which on the surface doesn't seem like you just want to put a bunch of points into it, right? But once you really beef this bad boy up, 585% poisoning damage over 9 seconds, which is great with 4 traps. You can have then they knock down, so you have another guaranteed way to knock down, which helps trigger this passive right here, right? That increased crit strike chance. And then I went with countering Poison Trap, 30% chance to reset your imbuement skills cooldowns when activated. So basically, and let's take a look at Poison Trap. So place a Poison Trap. It activates when an enemy moves within, does the damage, does that action right there. So it's really nice because basically it allows you to do quite a bit of damage because your imbuments can recycle, so you can just stack up your poison imbuement. You can go the alternate route if you want, but I decided not to. Exploit here, you deal 18% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies, and then Malice, deal 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, since we have so much vuln up all the time. Now here's our spicy section, right? We're going to put 1 point into Shadow Imbuement and then get Blended Shadow Imbuement so that the primary explosion makes enemies vuln. It's a massive source of vuln for us, and it's really, really nice. You only need 1 point because we're really using Shadow Imbuement here as a form of crowd control. Putting a bunch of points into it's not really going to be that hugely advantageous because we pull the passive, Shadow Crash is fine, we're just getting into consuming shadow. So each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage, you generate 10 energy. So this basically turns our shadow imbuement into an energy generator by allowing it to just blow up across the map. And it's probably one of the most satisfying combinations of abilities. You use shadow imbuement on your penetrating shot, it just shoots everywhere, and it just does a massive amount of explosions and a ton of energy. You fully recycle when you use it. With our poison imbuement, that's going to be our massive damage dealer, right? So just the base rank. So your next 2 imbuable skills deal poison damage and apply 204% of their base damage as additional poisoning damage. And the lucky hit has a 30% chance to apply double the amount of poisoning damage over time. Remember, our lucky hit is 80% chance, right? So of that, we then have a 30% chance. So it's a substantial chance that we actually double our poison damage and do a ton to pretty much kill a boss in like 2 shots of this, or at least get that full damage of poison on them. It's very, very nice. We are skipping out on the increase to poisoning damage here, and they deal less damage because I'd like to get a little bit more utility out of other abilities. We do have precision imbuement, so imbued skills gain 9% increased crit strike chance. We do want to make sure we try and crit strike our poison imbuement as much as possible. Into our ultimate line, I've skipped all 3 of the ultimates because we're using Adrenaline Rush just to get some, it's just here to get this, haste. So while at or above 50% energy, you gain increased attack speed. While below, you gain increased attack, while above, you gain increased movement speed. While below, you gain increased attack speed. And you have to think of this from the standpoint of being in a boss engagement. You're probably going to be below 50% max energy because it's just you and the boss. So increased attack speed is going to be more beneficial. But when you are trying to just clear through hordes of stuff, having that haste on is going to be nice to just keep you at a max move speed because you'll just be blowing things up with your max energy. Now into our capstone passive, as it were, we went with precision. So crit strikes with marksman skills grant you precision. You gain 4% increased crit strike damage per stack of precision up to 20%. When you reach max precision, your next marksman skill is a guaranteed crit strike that deals 40% increased crit strike damage, then consumes all stacks of precision. I'm not gonna lie here. I'm not 100% sold on precision. I don't think it's that amazing. I think it goes off a little less planned. It's not like Rathma's Vigor for Blood Build and Necromancer where you can really plan when you're using this. I think it's kind of hard to plan around it because of the hecticness of a rogue build. And I will say that, this section is a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but this is a very active build. You're going to be moving around. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff here. And I think that you need the trick. Well, I mean, you absolutely need the trick shot aspect. I put it on this to have this entire build work. So whenever penetrating shot damages an enemy, 2 additional arrows split off to either side. It doesn't matter about the damage that they deal. They just need to split off. Maxing this out to 25% would be very, very nice, but still, you want to make sure that you're getting those exploding damage bits out of here because that's a big, big portion of the build. So now we've kind of gone over everything here, giving you some options for different defenses that you can use. Let me show you how this build all comes together. So before we open up any engagement, we really want to kind of frame what's going to go on, right? If we're attacking a single target, we're going to use Poison Imbuement. If we are attacking a group of monsters, we're doing a Hell Tide, just nothing that's really elite, we're going to be going with Shadow Imbuments, really, because we want to focus on getting those big explosions out. And remember, we were going to be using Forceful Arrow to stack up 3 of these combo points to then do the max damage on penetrating shot and increase that lucky hit chance. For the most part, we're going to use Concealment and Poison Traps as either get out of jail free cards or a way to stack up a ton of Poison Traps. So let's go ahead and, before we even get into this engagement, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Shadow Imbuement. I'm going to 1, 2, I didn't know there was elite right here. We're going to kind of march around. We want things to kind of stack up. That's a big thing. Like, even though it's not, there it goes. There, you can see that thing just explodes, right? Even though that's kind of not how the skill rotation works, getting things to stack up is a big portion of this build. So let's also now use Poison Trap offensively. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get some combo points. I'm going to press W to pop into Poison Imbuement. I'm going to use Concealment, go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to right click and pop out. So that allowed us, that was super convoluted to talk about out loud, but that allowed us to just kind of recap here. Use those combo points to trigger the max damage of Forceful Arrow. We used Concealment to then drop these Poison Traps around us without having to deal with their cooldown. Typically, Poison Trap, you drop it once, it has a quick little arming animation, and then it takes 8 seconds before you can use it again. Otherwise, here's what we do with that aspect, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we use right click to jump out of Concealment. And that everything's just taking tons of damage. If you don't need to kind of stagger them like that, you can stack them all up if you want. I was just kind of helping to display that. But when we come out of stealth, we're going to be doing a bunch of punchy damage because of this thing giving me that little bit of extra chance to get all these Poison Traps down, and Concealment helping to give me a little bit more damage. The skill that breaks Concealment will always be a guaranteed crit strike. You can play a little bit more with stealth stuff, but this is how I've envisioned the build and how I think is probably the most fun. There are, again, plenty of optimal ways you can approach this. I mean, people could probably use Puncture in this build or other things like that. I did not. I wanted to try and go purely with an Archer style build using ranged abilities. I know that stuff like puncture is very, very, very good in the game and a lot of people are using it. But again, like I've said, the point of this build is to try to be as ranged as possible. And caltrops can be used in exchange here for concealment by allowing you to kind of create some room. Again, the only problem I have with caltrops in this build is that it does prevent you from breaking out of any kind of serious CC or any kind of get out of jail free card. You're kind of relying on caltrops in the barrier of some of your aspects to get you out of a tight situation. Moving over to d4builds.gg, it's a little bit easier to talk about both affixes and aspects using this screen because I'm going to show you what all of our ideal ones are. Now, if you've never used this website, it's got everything we kind of really need, and you can just scroll down here to take a look at all the affixes we've selected for each individual item. But for the helmet, we start with one of the most important aspects here. I'm going to go through all the most important gotta have aspects first. Umbrous. So why this is important here is, again, like I've said before, lucky hit crit strikes with marksman skills have up to a 60% chance to grant a free Dark Shroud Shadow. This is how we use Dark Shroud. We're not having it on our skill tree anymore, on our skill, what's it called anymore? We exclusively have it here. And then for our helmet, we'll have max life, cooldown reduction, ranks of poison imbuement, and total armor. We want poison imbuement over shadow imbuement because, like I've said before, shadow imbuement is just there to do the AoE damage. Poison imbuement is the thing that's really going to help us capsize any elites or any kind of bosses. So that's why we're focusing on that for our helmet rather than shadow, just in case you were wondering. Also for our amulet, we're going to go the aspect of corruption here. So your imbuement skills have a 20 to 40% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. Because this is on an amulet, we get a 50% bonus to this, right? So that is actually 30 to 60%. So a 60% increased potency against vulnerable enemies is very nice. It's what allows this build to really melt bosses in 2-3 shots. Then we're going to go cooldown reduction, movement speed, energy cost reduction, and imbuement skill cooldown reduction. Conversely, you can try to focus on any kind of skills you want in this location if you really want, but I like that imbuement skill reduction because I want to be able to have as much uptime on my poison imbuments as possible. Then we also have the trick shot aspect. Whenever penetrating shot damages an enemy, 2 additional arrows split off to either side. These arrows deal 10 to, again, the damage doesn't matter here. We want to make sure it explodes more than anything. I've been using the codex aspect of this the entire time I've tested the build, and it works just fine. The additional 15% damage will just be nice to have, but it's not necessary. Now, for our weapons, both weapons will have the exact same affixes here. We have vulnerable damage, crit strike damage with imbued skills, and dexterity. Those are on our dual wield weapons because we won't be using them. They're just stat sticks, meaning that you're never going to use them. It doesn't matter what they are. Ideally, the highest item value is what you'd want because then it gives you the highest affix roll. But you can get 2 of these and just keep them on for as long as you can. You can use that while leveling. You can use that in the mid game, or I guess quote unquote in the end game. I wouldn't know 100% on that part because I've not done it, but still. The other aspect we'll go with dual wield is aspect of the expected. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases damage your next core skill by 5 to 10% up to 30%. So what you've got to think about with this is how we're using our basic skill. 1, 2, 3 combo generator, right? So every time we use our basic to generate combo points, we're getting that 30% damage bonus into penetrating shot. It's a real nice little ditty to just really kind of help ramp that damage up. I'm saying 30% because, of course, 10% times 3, there you go. Then for our range weapon, remember range weapons are 2-handed weapons. So whatever the value you see on this screen, it's actually increased by 100%. So skills deal up to 10 to 20% increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the max benefit while you have full primary resource. We've already talked about how you're just going to be generating tons of resource through your shadow imbuement. And that's really nice here because this is going to do 40% increased damage for you when you have Edge Masters going wild. Now for the range weapons affixes, we want vulnerable damage, crit strike with imbued, and then dexterity. You can swap dexterity on any one of these 3 weapons for something like, say, with damage with poison traps, or with traps, because that will help out your poison trap dealing a significant amount of damage. For the rest of our items, let's go through the rest of our armor. We have aspect of the protector here. Is that really gonna, they're gonna stay up there? Aspect of the Protector is just our barrier, right? So whenever we take a lot of damage, we're going to pop into a barrier if it's really going to stay up there. But for the affixes, we want max life, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, which is going to be a lot of the ones you're going to be dealing with because of your poison trap and because of your poison imbuement, total armor, and damage reduction. Remember, your chest and your pants are your biggest defensive pieces. And when you are playing a rogue, you need to make sure you maximize your armor because that is innate damage reduction. So maximize that armor as best you can so that on your paper doll, it says 85% damage reduction when hovered over. I don't know how to hover over it on console, but it's neither here nor there, I suppose. For gloves, we have the Infiltrator's aspect. We've talked about this before, but now your poison trap no longer breaks stealth. You can run around, place a bunch of them. It's very, very nice. But we definitely want ranks of penetrating shot. That's the most important thing on our gloves because that's a raw damage increase to our penetrating shot. Attack speed, crit strike chance, crit strike damage with imbued skills. Anything you see here that says crit strike damage with imbued skills, you can swap off for crit strike damage. It's just that we're going to be using imbued skills so much at the time, you might as well get as much of the impact that we can. It rolls a higher value for crit strike damage with imbued skills than it does for just crit strike damage. It's why we see it here in these affixes. For our pants, basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. We're going to be using our basic skill all the time, so it's just a nice flat 20% DR, which you definitely need playing a rogue. Max life increase here, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, damage reduction, and then total armor. That's going to be a huge amount of DR for you. Boots are going to have the eluding aspect. Usually you'd go with something like a Ghost Walker for a lot of builds. Not here because we already have basically a guaranteed Ghost Walker with concealment. Becoming injured while crowd controlled grants you unstoppable for 4 seconds. This effect has a 40 to 20 second cooldown. Movement speed, just like our amulet, but dodge chance against distance and damage reduction while injured. For your implicit here, I don't think we have that. Yeah, we don't. For your implicit, I would go with something that increases your max amount of evades because having evades on a rogue is very, very nice. And dodge chance is very nice as well because a dodge chance is an outright damage mitigation. You do not receive any damage from a dodge. So dodge chance against distant enemies is very, very nice because it's a higher magnitude dodge chance. Then our last two items here are a ring with conceited, so deal 15 to 25% increased damage while you have a barrier active. This keys off of aspect of the Praetorian pigeon, aspect of the Protector, which is going to grant us a barrier. Then the rapid aspect, basic skills gain 15 to 30% attack speed. That's quite nice here. If you decide to go with caltrops rather than concealment, then Infiltrator's gloves, you'd simply use Trickster's aspect. Caltrops also throw a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal X total physical damage and stun enemies. We don't care about the damage, we just like the stun. There are also ways that you can add a bunch of days into this build, but days is kind of a tricky mechanic that I didn't want to spend too much time in because I think it might be a little bit too complex. And the build is already very active. I didn't want to make it even more active. This should actually be concealment. There we go. So for our gems, we're going to be going crit strike damage against vulnerable enemies naturally, and then we're going to go 2 into here and 1 into each one of these. It's going to be a massive amount of crit strike damage against vuln. Topazes always, and then skulls always for our armor and our jewelry. And of course, our specialization is going to be combo points. But these are all of your aspects and all of your affixes for all of your gear. And again, you just kind of take a look at these and see what you can make happen. Don't look at this video and go, holy crap, this build's never going to come off the ground. I think of my actual character, I don't have a lot of those affixes. I've got penetrating shot right here and crit strike damage with imbued skills on my actual gloves, but the rest is just not like that. It's got 57 intelligence. It's a waste. Well, not that wasted, but it's crit strike chance, but it's not that beneficial here. So don't feel like you need all those things. It's just to, again, show you what it would look like in a perfect world if you could just maximize all of your affix options. Gives you something to hunt for as you go through your game. As far as our Paragon board goes, my Paragon board is not complete in this build. I will complete this Paragon board and this will be updated as I push through it. So if you're watching this going, man, I actually need the next board, I'll be updating it and like the next couple of days here, but just to kind of show you where we're at right now, your starting board is going to go with Ranger because we get 70 decks in this glyph radius. Ranger is going to be nice because it's going to give us marksman skill flat damage. It's lovely. And while wielding a ranged weapon, you take 10% reduced damage. It's just a nice little flat DR benefit. Then the next board we're going to go with is No Witnesses, and we're going to socket into that exploit since we have such a massive amount of vuln damage that we can distribute. It's so crucial. So when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vuln for 3 seconds. This cannot happen more than once, blah, 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 blah. We don't care about that. It's the top one we want. For every 5 strength purchase within range, you deal 3.1% increased damage to vulnerable targets. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So here's 5.3 vuln damage, and I barely have any of them active. You want to get this to level 15, so you can grab this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, all these other little sockets around it. I don't think it's the one you should get to level 15 first. I think you should get your marksman 1 to 15 first, because it's just a flat damage increase to your marksman skills, which is quite nice. This requires a little bit more investment around the board to get active. But once you've got everything, you're looking at quite a bit of damage increase here, especially from your rare nodes and your magic nodes around this location that just have flat damage increases and stuff like that. Onto our last board is Exploit Weaknesses, which has control. So for every 5 intelligence purchase within range, you deal 11.26% increased damage to crowd control targets. Remember, you are crowd controlling everything with your shadow imbuement or with your poison imbuement. So you just get a ton of damage here. Also, you deal 10% increased damage to slowed, which you will be doing, or chilled enemies, or instead 20% increased damage to stunned or frozen enemies. And this is kind of something where you can see that Caltrops is going to give you a bit of an advantage here, because Caltrops with the Tricksters aspect does stun things for you. So that's a 20% damage increase to anything that is stunned by Caltrops. It just depends on how you want to play that. Then from there, you're going to come over here and grab the rare node over here for increased vuln damage, all the way over here. So in total, it's going to give you a 20% increased damage to vuln, or just 20% increased vuln damage. And then down here for damage towards elites, because it's just a nice to have. You can pick up the Legendary Lord whenever you deal Legendary Node. Whenever you deal damage to vuln enemies, they take 1% increased damage from you for 6 seconds, up to 15%. You can grab that before heading out, or just head on out. And I'll complete the rest of this Paragon board for you guys, but this is kind of where you'd start with a quote-unquote mid-game build, where you'd hit around level 70 probably or so to kind of complete all this, maybe even 75. But this should give you a real good starting point for your pen shot rogue. And as a quick note for leveling here, you can just simply go ahead and take all this as you would as you're leveling. The only thing I would change here is I would just do this, points out of Poison Trap, and just put them directly into Dark Shroud. That's how I'd change this if I was leveling, because it's just nicer to have Dark Shroud on demand. You don't have to use Poison Trap while you're leveling. It's nice to just be able to have the damage reduction from Dark Shroud and also the movement speed. So if you're leveling, just simply get Dark Shroud and get it online so you can have fun with it and just push through the leveling process. But once you hit level 50, you can take 3 points out and put them right here into Poison Trap. So now we've taken a look at all these aspects about the rogue. How does it really kind of chalk up? How is the pen shot build? And I'm not going to lie to you, the pen shot build is not the top meta build. I'm not using puncture, which everyone's really jumping on right now. I'm not using barrage or rapid fire. I didn't want to. I wanted to use specifically the skills that I put into this build. So if you do say like, hey, why aren't you using puncture, stuff like that, it's just not the skills that I wanted to use here. But what I instead have is a character that runs into a room and blows everything up with shadow imbuement, and I find that to be so damn fun. You can easily swap pen shot out for any number of other skills instead. If you want to use barrage or if you want to use rapid fire, then just go ahead and get the aspects that you want and kind of filter them in. As always, guys, please use my guides as a blueprint to the way that you want to play. And I'm loving the way that this build plays out. I leveled up using Caltrops and Dark Shroud, and then recently swapped off to be using more of the poison traps and using concealment, and I find myself really enjoying that play. Being able to spice around and drop these little traps everywhere and stuff like that is so fun to me with this build. And I find too that I was able to kill Elias at level 58 with this build And I think it's a pretty cool hallmark of this build's ability to kind of play around in the mid game. And if you watch this content of the Nightmare Dungeons that we're doing, I'm level 60, 61, 62, around that, whatever I'm at this actual Nightmare Dungeon. And we're killing stuff in the 70 plus region. We're at level 21, level 22 Nightmare Dungeons. And that's actually, again, pretty fun for me. Now, you don't need to be pushing those level of Nightmare Dungeons at around level 60. That's not necessarily very necessary. You'd really do that more around the upper 70s, 80s. You'd start pushing into really very high Nightmare Dungeons to get tons of experience and drops. But with that being said, if you're just looking to play a casual Archer Rogue build, I think this one's really going to hit a lot of checkboxes for you. And I don't think that this is a terrible build to take into the end game. I just don't think personally, and again, being transparent, I've optimized it enough to truly survive the end game. So I will be updating this build with a better Paragon board and maybe some swaps out to some skills and some aspects as I crest into the end game with this build. But I think this is going to be one that's going to be very fun to play at the beginning of the start of the first season, where maybe if you've never played a rogue and you don't want to do a Twisting Blades rogue or whatever, this is a really cool off-meta build that is still quite strong, has good survivability, not amazing. This is not the tanky rogue that you can definitely build out, and it provides you with a lot of fun utility to bounce around and have as much fun as you can while playing your first rogue archer pin shot build or whatever the hell you want to call this damn thing. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. If you have any questions about the build, or maybe you can't get something to kind of come online 100%, let me know in the comment section below. A lot of the times that can come down to a specific aspect or affix, maybe not being a max roll or whatever it is. I'm more than happy to help you out as best I can. And if you have any suggestions for the build, say, hey, you know what, I ran a build very similar to this, and this is what I swapped out, and I'm having a lot more luck, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. As always, I really love to hear any feedback that you guys have. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and take care.